The piercing crack of a Winchester rifle silenced the crowded saloon, sending whiskey glasses clattering as Zoe O'Connor stood defiant behind the bar, wisps of gunsmoke still curling from the barrel pointed at the ceiling. The year was 1876, and Fairplay, Colorado, wasn't ready for a woman like her. "Gentlemen," she announced, her emerald eyes scanning the roomful of stunned miners and cowhands, "the Golden Nugget Saloon is under new management." She lowered the rifle, resting it against the polished mahogany. "My management." Fairplay, nestled in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains, had seen its share of bold claims since the gold rush days, but nothing quite like this. The silence held for 3 heartbeats before erupting into raucous laughter. "A woman running a saloon," bellowed Hank Peterson, the local blacksmith whose forearms were as thick as fence posts. "That'll be the day. Your pa must be rolling in his fresh grave, girl," called another, wiping tears of mirth from his weathered face. Zoe's father, Michael O'Connor, had indeed been laid to rest just 3 days prior, the victim of a heart that had finally given out after 30 years of pouring drinks and breaking up fights. The Golden Nugget had been his life, and now it was hers, the only inheritance left to his only child. "I buried my father with dignity," Zoe replied evenly, though her knuckles whitened around the rifle stock. "And I intend to honor his memory by keeping this place alive." "Honey, you don't know the first thing about running a business," drawled Silas Morgan, the town's wealthiest cattle baron, who had been eyeing the property since before Michael had even fallen ill. "Best sell to me now before you embarrass yourself." The men murmured in agreement, nodding sagely as if they'd just heard the purest wisdom west of the Mississippi. All except one. "I believe she can do it," came a quiet voice from the corner. The crowd parted like the Red Sea as a tall figure pushed away from the wall. His worn cavalry hat cast shadows over eyes blue as a mountain lake, and a star-shaped badge glinted on his vest. Deputy Jackson Quinn had been Fairplay's voice of reason for the past 2 years, and rarely spoke unless he had something worth saying. "Jackson," Silas scoffed. "You've been drinking too much of Michael's rot gut. Women belong in kitchens and bedrooms, not businesses." "Strange," Jackson replied, strolling toward the bar with the easy confidence of a man who'd faced down worse than Silas Morgan. "I seem to recall Mrs. Hargrove runs the town's only boarding house, and it's the finest establishment in 3 counties." "That's different," someone protested weakly. "Is it?" Jackson removed his hat, revealing chestnut hair that curled slightly at the collar of his shirt. "Miss O'Connor, as an officer of the law, I'm obliged to tell you that running a saloon is difficult, dangerous work." Zoe lifted her chin. "I'm aware, Deputy. There'll be trouble, drunks, cheats, and men who can't hold their liquor or their tempers. Nothing I haven't seen growing up here." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "Then, as a citizen of Fairplay, I'd like to be your first customer under new management." The saloon erupted again, this time in protests and jeers, but Jackson laid a silver dollar on the counter. "Whiskey, please. The good stuff." Zoe slid the bottle toward him, her hand steady despite the storm of emotions churning within. "On the house, Deputy, for being the only man here with sense enough to see that times are changing." As she poured his drink, their eyes met, and something electric passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or the first flicker of something deeper. Whatever it was in that moment, with laughter still echoing around her and a business to save, Zoe knew one thing for certain. Jackson Quinn might be the only ally she had in Fairplay, but he might just be the only one she needed. The next morning dawned crisp and clear, the kind of autumn day that reminded everyone winter was around the corner. Zoe arrived at the saloon before sunrise, determined to prove her mettle. Her father had taught her the business from the sidelines, how to order stock, manage the books, even how to spot a card cheat, but she'd never been allowed to run things herself. She was sweeping the floor when the back door creaked open. She whirled, broom raised as a weapon, only to find Jackson Quinn carrying a crate of bottles. "Delivery from the morning stage," he explained, setting it down carefully. "Figured I'd save you the trouble of fetching it yourself." "I could have managed," she replied, though gratitude softened her tone, never suggested otherwise. He removed his hat, running a hand through his hair. "Just being neighborly." Zoe leaned on her broom. "Is that all it is, Deputy Quinn? Neighborliness?" His eyes crinkled at the corners. "No, madam. It's also self-interest. Fairplay needs this saloon, and I'd hate to see it fall to Silas Morgan. Man's got enough power in this town already." "Well, at least you're honest." She resumed sweeping, aware of his gaze following her movements. "My father always said you were a straight shooter." "Michael was a good judge of character." Jackson hesitated. "He was also my friend. I promised him I'd look out for you if anything happened to him." Zoe stopped mid-sweep. "He made you promise that?" Jackson nodded. "Last winter, when the fever nearly took him. Said you'd fight accepting help, being as stubborn as your mother was." She hadn't expected that revelation, nor the wave of emotion that came with it. Her mother, Eliza, had died when Zoe was 12, leaving her father to raise her alone in the back rooms of the saloon. "I don't recall asking for a guardian angel, Deputy. Good thing, too. My wings are in terrible condition." The hint of humor in his voice drew an unwilling smile from her. "Look, I'm not here to run your business or fight your battles, just to lend a hand when needed." "And what do you get in return?" His expression grew serious. "The satisfaction of keeping a promise to a friend, and perhaps the pleasure of your company now and then." Before she could respond, the front door banged open, revealing Silas Morgan flanked by two of his ranch hands. The cattle baron's eyes narrowed at the sight of Jackson. Well, the deputy's already making house calls. "Tell me, Quinn, is this official business, or are you sweet on our little saloon keeper?" Jackson didn't rise to the bait. "Morning, Silas. Bit early for a drink, isn't it?" "Not here for whiskey. I'm here to make Miss O'Connor one final offer before she ruins herself." Silas approached the bar, setting a leather pouch down with a heavy clink. $5,000. More than fair for a saloon that'll be empty once word gets around it's run by a woman. Zoe stared at the pouch, momentarily stunned by the sum. It was a fortune by Fairplay standards, enough to start a new life anywhere she pleased. For a fleeting moment, she considered it the freedom from struggle, from proving herself daily to men who'd never see her as an equal. "Mr. Morgan," she finally said, sliding the pouch back toward him, "the Golden Nugget isn't for sale, not at any price." Silas's face darkened. "You'll regret this, girl, I guarantee it." "That's her final word on the matter," Jackson interjected, stepping slightly forward. Though his posture remained relaxed, there was steel in his voice. "I suggest you respect it. Or what, Deputy? You'll arrest me for making a business proposition." Silas sneered, then turned back to Zoe. "Mark my words, within a month you'll be begging me to take this place off your hands." With that, he snatched up his money and stormed out, his men trailing behind like faithful hounds. When they were gone, Zoe released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you for your support, Deputy, but I need to make something clear. I won't be begging anyone for anything, and I don't need saving." Jackson regarded her thoughtfully. "Understood, but everyone needs allies, Miss O'Connor, even the strongest among us." "Zoe," she corrected him, "if we're going to be allies, you might as well use my name." "Jackson," he replied with a nod. "Now, how about I help you unpack that crate before I head back to my duties? As they worked side by side, Zoe found herself studying him surreptitiously. Jackson Quinn wasn't like the other men in Fairplay. There was a quietness to him, a thoughtfulness that set him apart. She'd seen him break up brawls without throwing a single punch, diffusing tensions with nothing but words and the promise of his authority. He'd arrived in town 2 years ago, already wearing a deputy's badge from somewhere back east, though he rarely spoke of his past. Rumor had it he'd fought in the war between the states, but like many who'd lived through those bloody years, he kept those memories buried deep. "You're staring," he noted without looking up from the bottle he was examining. "Just trying to figure you out," she admitted. "Why you'd stick your neck out for me when everyone else is betting I'll fail." He set the bottle down carefully. "Maybe I don't like bullies. Or maybe I recognize determination when I see it." His eyes met hers, clear and direct. "Your father didn't raise a quitter, Zoe. He raised a fighter." Something warm unfurled in her chest at his words. "How would you know that?" "Because I pay attention." Jackson picked up his hat from the counter. "And because I've watched you help run this place for 2 years while your father's health failed, though you both pretended otherwise." She blinked in surprise. Few had noticed how she'd gradually taken on more responsibilities as Michael's strength waned, ordering supplies, handling difficult customers, balancing the books late into the night while her father slept. "You saw all that. It's my job to see things others miss." He placed his hat on his head, tipping it slightly. "I'll stop by later if that's all right, after my rounds." After he left, Zoe stood in the quiet of the empty saloon, contemplating the unexpected ally she'd found in Jackson Quinn. For the first time since her father's death, she allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope. She might be facing an uphill battle, but at least she wasn't facing it alone. The saloon's official reopening that evening was sparsely attended. Word had spread through Fairplay like wildfire. The O'Connor girl thought she could run a man's business. Most stayed away out of loyalty to Silas Morgan, who owned half the town's mortgages, or simply because they couldn't stomach the idea of a woman pouring their drinks. But a few came out of curiosity, and others out of loyalty to Michael's memory. Doc Pearson, who had treated her father until the end, occupied his usual corner table. Mrs. Hargrove from the boarding house made a rare appearance, ordering a small sherry and nodding approval at Zoe's efficient service. 3 railroad workers, new to town and unaware of local politics, laughed and played cards near the window. And true to his word, Jackson arrived after his evening rounds, taking a seat at the bar where he could observe the room. "Quieter than usual," he remarked. "I expected as much." Zoe polished a glass with more vigor than necessary. "They'll come around when they realize the whiskey tastes the same no matter who pours it. Some might take longer than others to see reason." He glanced toward the window, where several men had gathered, peering in but not entering. "Silas has been busy spreading his opinion around town." Zoe followed his gaze and lifted her chin defiantly. "Let him talk. Actions speak louder." The evening passed without incident, though the tension of waiting for trouble left Zoe exhausted. When she finally locked the front door just after midnight, the night's earnings were meager, barely enough to cover the cost of the lamps she'd kept burning. She was counting till when a soft knock came at the back door. Hand moving to the shotgun beneath the counter, she called out, "Who's there?" "Jackson. Wanted to make sure you got home safe." Relief washed over her as she unlocked the door. He stood in the moonlight, his expression unreadable in the shadows. "I live upstairs," she explained. "Same rooms I grew up in," he nodded, stepping inside and removing his hat. "Smart. Safer than walking home alone." "I can take care of myself," she reminded him, though there was no heat in her words. Never doubted it. He glanced around the darkened saloon. How was business? Slower than a turtle in molasses. She sighed, leaning against the bar. But it's only the first night. Things will improve. Jackson seemed to be weighing his words carefully. Zoe, there's something you should know. Silas Morgan has been talking to the suppliers in Denver, trying to convince them not to do business with you. Her stomach dropped. Can he do that? He's got influence, and money talks. Jackson's jaw tightened. But it's not just business. There's rumors he might try to cause trouble here to scare you into selling. What kind of trouble? The kind that tends to happen in saloons. Fights, broken furniture, scared customers. He stepped closer, his voice lowering. I can increase patrols around here, but I can't be everywhere. Zoe straightened, determination flaring. I won't be intimidated. This place was my father's life's work, and now it's mine. Something like admiration flickered in Jackson's eyes. Just be careful. Silas doesn't like losing. Neither do I. She met his gaze steadily. Thank you for the warning, Deputy. He nodded, settling his hat back on his head. Lock up behind me. I'll see you tomorrow. After he left, Zoe climbed the narrow stairs to her small apartment, bone-weary but resolute. As she prepared for bed, she thought of Jackson Quinn's quiet support, the way he'd stood beside her when everyone else had laughed or turned away. There was something undeniably comforting about his presence, a steadiness she hadn't realized she'd been missing. But she also knew better than to rely too heavily on anyone else. In the end, the success or failure of the Golden Nugget would rest on her shoulders alone. The next morning, Zoe woke before dawn and headed downstairs to begin preparations for the day. She was checking her inventory when a sharp knock at the front door startled her. Standing on the porch was a young man in a dust-covered duster, holding the reins of a pack mule laden with wooden crates. Delivery from Denver Spirits and Supply, he called through the glass. Got an order here for Michael O'Connor. Hope surged through her as she unlocked the door. Her father had placed a standing monthly order with the Denver supplier, but after Jackson's warning, she'd feared it might be canceled. Mr. O'Connor passed recently, she explained, signing for the delivery. I'm his daughter, Zoe. I'm running the saloon now. The young man looked surprised but shrugged. Payments already settled through the end of the year. Where do you want these crates, Miss O'Connor? As they unloaded the supplies, Zoe silently thanked her father for his foresight. At least she wouldn't have to worry about running out of whiskey anytime soon. By mid-morning, she had everything in order and opened the doors for business. The day brought a trickle of curious customers, more than the night before, but still far fewer than when her father had been alive. Each glass she poured, each smile she offered, felt like a small victory against the naysayers. Around noon, the door swung open to reveal Jackson, accompanied by an older man Zoe didn't recognize. The stranger wore a trail-worn suit and carried himself with the confident bearing of someone important. Miss O'Connor, Jackson called, I'd like you to meet Judge William Haynes, circuit court judge for our county. He's in town for the week. The judge approached the bar, studying Zoe with keen interest. Deputy Quinn has been singing your praises, young lady. Says you're breathing new life into this establishment. Zoe shot Jackson a grateful look before addressing the judge. I'm simply trying to continue my father's legacy, Your Honor, and facing considerable opposition from what I hear. The judge settled onto a bar stool. I've known Silas Morgan for 20 years. Man's as stubborn as a government mule and twice as ornery when crossed. I've noticed, Zoe replied dryly. The judge chuckled. Well, I've always believed in fair competition and free enterprise, two principles Mr. Morgan could stand to learn. He glanced around the saloon. This is a fine establishment. Your father was a good man who ran a respectable business. I see no reason his daughter shouldn't continue that tradition. Jackson's expression remained neutral, but Zoe caught the satisfied glint in his eyes. She realized he'd brought the judge here deliberately, knowing his public support would carry weight in Fairplay. "Thank you, Your Honor. What can I get you to drink?" "Bourbon, if you have it, and whatever the deputy's having." As she served them, other customers began to filter in, drawn perhaps by the judge's presence or simple midday thirst. By early afternoon, the Golden Nugget had more patrons than it had seen since reopening. When the judge finally departed, leaving a generous tip, Jackson lingered at the bar. "Judge Haynes is well respected throughout the territory," he noted casually. "People tend to follow his lead." Zoe leaned forward, lowering her voice. "You planned this, didn't you?" A smile tugged at his lips. "I may have mentioned to the judge that Fairplay's finest saloon was under new management, and that certain parties were attempting to sabotage a legitimate business." "Thank you," she said simply. "Don't thank me yet. Silas won't take this lying down." As if summoned by his name, the saloon doors burst open and Silas Morgan strode in, face flushed with anger. The room quieted instantly. "So this is your game, Quinn," he spat, advancing on Jackson. "Bringing the judge here, turning him against me. I've got business interests to protect." Jackson didn't rise from his stool. "The judge makes up his own mind, Silas. Always has. And what mind-changing stories have you been telling about me?" Silas turned his glare on Zoe. "Or has the little lady been spreading lies?" "I haven't said a word against you, Mr. Morgan," Zoe replied evenly, "though your actions speak for themselves." A vein throbbed in Silas's temple. "You think you're clever, girl, but you're in over your head. This town needs a proper saloon, run by someone who understands how things work." "The Golden Nugget is a proper saloon," Zoe countered, "and I understand exactly how things work. I grew up in this business." Silas sneered. "Playing barmaid while Daddy did the real work doesn't make you qualified." Jackson stood slowly. "That's enough, Silas. Stay out of this, Deputy. This is between me and the O'Connor girl." "Miss O'Connor," Jackson corrected firmly. "And as the peace officer in this establishment, I'm telling you to mind your tone or take your grievances elsewhere." For a tense moment, the two men locked eyes, neither willing to back down. The entire saloon seemed to hold its breath. Finally, Silas took a step back. "This isn't over," he warned, his gaze shifting between Jackson and Zoe. "Not by a long shot." After he stormed out, conversation gradually resumed, though with a nervous energy that hadn't been there before. Zoe released a shaky breath, only then realizing how tightly she'd been gripping the edge of the bar. "You all right?" Jackson asked quietly. "I'm fine," she assured him, though her heart was still racing. "But I don't think that's the last we'll see of Silas Morgan's temper." Jackson's expression darkened. "No, it isn't. But remember, you're not alone in this fight." As he said the words, Zoe realized with startling clarity that she was beginning to count on his presence, his steady support. The thought both comforted and unsettled her. She'd spent years watching her father rely only on himself, teaching her to do the same. Trusting Jackson Quinn, or anyone went against everything she'd learned about survival. Yet as she watched him return to his drink, nodding greetings to the other patrons, she couldn't deny the warmth that spread through her chest. Perhaps some battles weren't meant to be fought alone. The following days settled into a cautious routine. Word of Judge Haynes' approval spread through Fairplay, and business at the Golden Nugget gradually improved. Some customers still refused to enter a saloon run by a woman, but enough returned to keep the doors open. Jackson stopped by every evening, sometimes staying for hours, other times just long enough to check that all was well. He never interfered with how Zoe ran things, offering advice only when asked. Yet his presence alone seemed to deter the rowdier elements from causing trouble. One evening, as a late autumn thunderstorm lashed against the windows, Zoe found herself sharing a quiet drink with Jackson after closing time. The saloon was empty save for them, the lamps turned low to save oil. "My father would be scandalized," she remarked, swirling whiskey in her glass. "Me drinking with a man unchaperoned." Jackson smiled. Michael had strong opinions about propriety. For a saloon keeper, he was remarkably old-fashioned. She took a small sip, savoring the burn. "Especially when it came to me. He wanted to protect you." "From what?" "Life," she sighed. "I always thought he didn't trust me to handle the business. Now I wonder if he was just trying to spare me the headaches." "Both, probably." Jackson leaned back in his chair. "Parents are complicated that way." "What about yours?" Zoe asked, realizing she knew little of his past. "You never mentioned family." A shadow crossed his face. "Lost my father in the war, Antietam. My mother followed 2 years later, pneumonia, they said, but I think it was more a broken heart." "I'm sorry," she said softly. He shrugged. "It was a long time ago. Is that why you became a lawman?" "After the war, partly." His fingers traced the rim of his glass. "Needed something to believe in again, something that made sense when nothing else did." He glanced up, his eyes meeting hers. "What about you? Did you always want to run the Golden Nugget?" Zoe considered the question. "Not always. When I was younger, I dreamed of going east, maybe to St. Louis or even Chicago, somewhere with theaters and proper society." She smiled ruefully. "My father would tell me stories about my mother, how she loved music and books, how she'd wanted me to have more opportunities than she'd had." "What changed?" "Life, I suppose. Father's health began failing and leaving seemed impossible." She gazed around the dimly lit saloon. "And somewhere along the way I realized I loved this place. It's in my blood now." Thunder rolled outside, rattling the windows. Jackson studied her face in the lamplight, and something in his expression made her heart quicken. "You're remarkable, Zoe O'Connor," he said quietly. "Most people would have given up by now, taken Silas's money and moved on. I'm too stubborn for my own good. I'd call it determination." "And courage." He hesitated, then added, "Your father would be proud." The simple statement touched something deep inside her, bringing unexpected tears to her eyes. She blinked them away quickly, embarrassed by the display of emotion. Jackson pretended not to notice, giving her a moment to compose herself. "It's getting late," he said, finishing his drink. "I should head back before this storm gets worse." As he rose to leave, Zoe found herself reluctant to end their conversation. "Jackson," she called as he reached the door, "thank you for believing in me when no one else did." He turned, his expression softening. It wasn't hard to believe in something that was already true. With that, he disappeared into the stormy night, leaving Zoe with a curious warmth that had nothing to do with the whiskey. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the storm having washed the world clean overnight. Zoe was organizing bottles behind the bar when Jackson burst through the door, his expression grim. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately, recognizing the tension in his shoulders. "Trouble," he replied tersely. "The supply wagon from Denver was stopped 10 miles outside town. Driver says 4 masked men held him up, took everything bound for the Golden Nugget." Zoe's stomach dropped. "Was he hurt?" "Roughed up, but he'll be all right. He managed to get a look at one of them, said he recognized the horse as belonging to Frank Doyle." "One of Silas's ranch hands," Zoe concluded, anger rising within her. "So Silas has moved from intimidation to outright theft." Jackson nodded grimly. "Problem is, without proof, there's not much I can legally do. The driver didn't see their faces, just a horse he thinks belongs to Doyle." "So Silas gets away with it." Zoe slammed her palm against the bar in frustration. "He's trying to run me out of business, Jackson. I know." His voice was steady despite the anger she could see simmering beneath his controlled exterior. But we need to be smarter than him. If we accuse him publicly without evidence, he could sue for slander. Then what do you suggest? Jackson lowered his voice, though the saloon was empty. I've sent a telegram to an old friend in Denver. He's going to arrange for your next shipment to come through under a different name on a different route. He reached across the bar, briefly covering her hand with his. We'll outmaneuver him, Zoe. I promise. The warmth of his touch and the determination in his eyes calmed her somewhat. In the meantime, I'm running dangerously low on supplies. I thought of that too. He produced a folded paper from his vest pocket. Judge Haynes is heading back to Denver tomorrow. He's agreed to place an emergency order for you to be delivered on the next stage under his name. Silas wouldn't dare interfere with a judge's property. Relief flooded through her. You've thought of everything, not everything. His expression grew more serious. Silas is escalating. If he's willing to organize a robbery, there's no telling what else he might do. Are you suggesting I give up? Zoe straightened her shoulders. Because that's not happening. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. I'd be disappointed if you did, but I am suggesting caution. Don't work alone at night. Keep that shotgun handy. And if anything at all seems wrong, send for me immediately. I can take care of myself, she reminded him, though with less conviction than usual. I know you can, but you don't have to. His eyes held hers, conveying something beyond mere concern. Not anymore. That evening, business was unusually brisk. Word of the supply wagon robbery had spread through town, and many came to the Golden Nugget out of curiosity or support. Zoe worked tirelessly, serving drinks and exchanging pleasantries, all while maintaining a watchful eye on the door. Jackson arrived shortly after sundown, taking his usual place at the bar where he could observe the room. He nursed a single whiskey for hours, his presence a reassuring constant amid the ebb and flow of customers. Near midnight, as the crowd was beginning to thin, the doors swung open to reveal Frank Doyle and 3 other men from Silas's ranch. They swaggered in, already half drunk, their loud voices cutting through the general hum of conversation. Well, look here, Doyle called, spreading his arms wide. The place is still open. Thought for sure you'd be closed by now, what with your supplies getting lost and all. He winked exaggeratedly at his companions, who snickered. Zoe saw Jackson tense, one hand dropping casually to rest near his holster. She caught his eye with a subtle shake of her head. She could handle this. Mr. Doyle, she greeted evenly. What can I get you gentlemen? 4 whiskeys, Doyle replied, slapping coins on the bar. If you've got any left, that is. As Zoe turned to pour the drinks, she heard one of the men mutter something that made the others laugh derisively. She ignored them, setting the glasses on the bar with practiced efficiency. Enjoy, she said flatly, turning to serve another customer. Doyle's hand shot out, grabbing her wrist. Now, that ain't very friendly, Miss O'Connor. A good hostess should smile for her customers. Before Zoe could react, Jackson was there, his hand clamping down on Doyle's forearm with enough force to make the man wince. Let her go, Jackson ordered quietly, his voice carrying an unmistakable threat. For a moment, tension crackled between them. Then Doyle released Zoe's wrist, raising his hands in mock surrender. Just being friendly, deputy. No harm intended. Jackson didn't move. I think you and your friends have had enough for tonight. Finish your drinks and leave. Doyle's expression darkened. You don't give the orders in here. That's the lady's job, ain't it? Unless. His mouth twisted in an ugly smile. Oh, I see how it is. Deputy's got himself a special interest in the new saloon keeper. That why you're taking her side against Mr. Morgan? Several nearby patrons shifted uncomfortably, sensing the confrontation brewing. Zoe stepped forward, refusing to let Jackson fight her battles. "Mr. Doyle, I appreciate your business, but I won't tolerate harassment of any kind in my establishment." Her voice was firm and clear. "You're welcome to finish your drinks respectfully or leave now. Your choice." Doyle stared at her for a long moment, then at Jackson, whose hand remained near his holster. Finally, he drained his whiskey in one swallow and gestured for his companions to do the same. "This place ain't worth the trouble anyway," he spat, heading for the door. "Enjoy it while you can, Miss O'Connor. Won't be yours much longer." After they left, the remaining patrons gradually relaxed, conversations resuming in hushed tones. Zoe felt Jackson's eyes on her but busied herself with wiping down the bar, not trusting her voice just yet. When the last customer had departed and the doors were locked, she finally allowed herself to slump against the bar, the strain of the confrontation catching up with her. "You handled that well," Jackson said quietly, coming to stand beside her. "Did I?" She massaged her wrist where Doyle had gripped it. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm just postponing the inevitable. Silas has money, influence, and apparently men willing to break the law for him. What do I have? Me," Jackson replied simply. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Zoe looked up at him, really looked, taking in the steadiness of his gaze, the quiet strength in his features. "Why, Jackson? Why risk Silas's enmity and the town's disapproval to help me?" He considered his answer carefully. "At first it was for Michael's sake, a promise to a friend." His voice softened. "But now it's for you, Zoe, because you deserve a fair chance, because you've shown more courage and determination than anyone I've ever met." He hesitated, then added, "And because when I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to believe in something completely." The honesty in his words stole her breath away. Without thinking, she reached out, her fingers lightly touching his. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." His hand turned, catching hers, their fingers intertwining. "Just don't give up, that's all I ask." In that moment, with his hand warm around hers and his eyes reflecting the lamplight, Zoe felt something shift between them, friendship deepening into something more complex, more frightening, and infinitely more precious. "I won't give up," she promised softly. "Not on the Golden Nugget and not on." The words faltered, but her eyes conveyed what she couldn't yet say. Jackson nodded, understanding in his gaze. "Good night, Zoe," he said, reluctantly releasing her hand. "Lock up tight. I'll see you tomorrow." After he left, Zoe climbed the stairs to her rooms, her mind whirling with the events of the day and the revelation of feelings she'd been denying for weeks. Sleep came slowly that night, her dreams filled with Jackson's steady gaze and the lingering warmth of his touch. The next morning brought unexpected news. Judge Haynes had departed for Denver as planned, carrying Zoe's supply order with him. But shortly after sunrise, a wagon arrived from the Double Circle Ranch on the outskirts of Fairplay, loaded with crates of whiskey, beer, and other essentials. The driver, an older cowhand named Pete, tipped his hat to Zoe as she stared in confusion. "Compliments of Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove, madam. She said you might be running low after your trouble yesterday." "Mrs. Hargrove," Zoe repeated, bewildered. "From the boarding house," Pete nodded. "She owns the Double Circle too, madam. Has for 15 years since her husband passed. Runs it through her foreman mostly, but it's her place right enough." As they unloaded the supplies, Pete explained further. "Mrs. Hargrove doesn't much care for Silas Morgan. Says he's been trying to buy her ranch for years, offering half what it's worth. When she heard what happened to your delivery, she figured it was him behind it." "This is incredibly generous," Zoe said, still amazed by the unexpected assistance. "Please tell her I'll pay for everything as soon as my Denver order arrives." Pete shook his head. "She was clear about that, madam. Said to consider it a loan if it bothers your pride, but there's no hurry on repayment. He lowered his voice. Between you and me, she's pleased as punch to see a woman running a business in Fairplay. Says it's about time. After Pete departed, Zoe stood among the crates, overwhelmed by the gesture. She'd always known Mrs. Hargrove to be a formidable woman. The boarding house she ran was indeed the finest establishment for miles, but she'd never imagined the stern widow would become an ally. She was still organizing the new supplies when Jackson arrived, concern etched on his features. I just heard about Mrs. Hargrove's delivery. Is everything all right? Zoe smiled, gesturing to the bounty around her. Better than all right. It seems I have more friends in Fairplay than I realized. Relief washed over his face. Eleanor Hargrove is a force of nature. Having her in your corner is no small thing. I'm beginning to understand that. Zoe handed him a crate to carry to the storeroom. Jackson, do you think this changes anything? With Silas, I mean. His expression grew serious again. It might make him think twice about certain tactics, knowing you have support from someone as respected as Mrs. Hargrove. But I doubt he'll give up entirely. He set the crate down carefully. Silas Morgan didn't become the most powerful man in the county by accepting defeat gracefully. Then what's his next move likely to be? Jackson considered the question. Hard to say, but I'd guess he'll try to undermine your business more directly, spread rumors perhaps, try to turn customers away. Zoe nodded slowly, formulating a plan. Then I need to give people a reason to come here that's stronger than their fear of crossing Silas Morgan. What do you have in mind? A smile spread across her face. A celebration, something to remind everyone that the Golden Nugget is still the heart of Fairplay. She began pacing, ideas flowing freely. Saturday night, music, special prices, maybe even a proper dinner, the kind of evening people will talk about for weeks. Jackson watched her with admiration. That might work. Give folks a chance to enjoy themselves and see firsthand that a woman-run saloon is still a saloon worth visiting. Exactly. Zoe's eyes sparkled with determination. Will you help me spread the word? We have 4 days to make this a success. I'll do better than that, he promised. I know a fellow in South Park who plays a mean fiddle, and Mrs. Hargrove might be convinced to contribute some of her famous apple pies. For the first time since her father's death, Zoe felt truly hopeful. Not just about saving the Golden Nugget, but about building something that was truly hers, a legacy that honored her father while embracing her own vision. And as she watched Jackson enthusiastically sketching out plans to transform the saloon for Saturday's celebration, she felt that unfamiliar warmth spreading through her chest again. Whatever happened with Silas Morgan, whatever challenges lay ahead, she was no longer facing them alone. The next few days passed in a flurry of activity. Zoe cleaned every inch of the Golden Nugget until the wooden floors gleamed and the brass fixtures shone like gold. She arranged with Mrs. Hargrove not only for pies but for the boarding house cook to prepare a simple but hearty stew that could be served to guests. Jackson's musician friend agreed to play, and several other local talents were recruited to join him. Word spread through Fairplay like wildfire. By Friday afternoon, it seemed everyone was talking about the grand celebration at the Golden Nugget, scheduled for Saturday evening. Not everyone's reaction was positive, of course. Silas Morgan made his displeasure known, suggesting to anyone who would listen that attending would be seen as a personal affront to him. Some heeded his warning, but many, particularly those who didn't rely on his goodwill for their livelihoods, seemed more intrigued than intimidated. Saturday dawned clear and cold, a perfect late autumn day. Zoe woke with the sun, too excited and nervous to sleep longer. By mid-morning, the saloon was transformed with fresh candles in every sconce, tables arranged to create space for dancing, and a small stage constructed for the musicians. Mrs. Hargrove arrived shortly after noon, supervising the delivery of 12 perfect apple pies and an enormous pot of venison stew. The older woman surveyed the preparations with an approving eye. "You've done well, Miss O'Connor," she pronounced, her usual stern expression softened by the ghost of a smile. "Your father would be proud to see this place in such good hands." Coming from the formidable Mrs. Hargrove, this was high praise indeed. "Thank you," Zoe replied, deeply touched. "For everything." The widow waved away her gratitude. "Nonsense. It's about time someone stood up to Silas Morgan." Her eyes twinkled with unexpected mischief. "Besides, I've always enjoyed a good party." As the afternoon waned, Zoe retreated upstairs to prepare herself for the evening. She bathed with her best lavender soap, then donned her finest dress, a deep green silk that her father had ordered from Denver for her 21st birthday last year. It was more formal than her usual attire, with a fitted bodice and a skirt that swished elegantly when she moved. Looking in the mirror, she barely recognized herself. Gone was the practical barmaid in sensible cotton. In her place stood a confident businesswoman ready to claim her rightful place in Fairplay society. A knock at the back door drew her downstairs. Jackson stood on the threshold, looking equally transformed. He'd traded his usual work clothes for a dark suit, crisp white shirt, and string tie. His hair was neatly combed and he'd trimmed his beard. In his hands, he held a small bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers. "For luck," he explained, handing them to her with an almost boyish shyness. Zoe accepted them, deeply moved by the gesture. "They're beautiful, thank you." He seemed momentarily lost for words as he took in her appearance. "You look remarkable," he finally managed. A blush warmed her cheeks. "So do you. I've never seen you in a suit before. Saved for special occasions." His eyes held hers. "And this qualifies as the most special occasion Fairplay has seen in years." Together, they made final preparations as the musicians arrived and began tuning their instruments. The fiddler, a wiry man named Cal, had brought along 2 friends with a guitar and harmonica. They set up on the small stage, testing the acoustics with snatches of lively tunes that set Zoe's feet tapping despite her nerves. At precisely 6 o'clock, she unlocked the front doors. For one terrible moment, she feared no one would come, that Silas's influence would prove too strong, or the town's prejudice against a female business owner too deeply entrenched. Then the first guests arrived: Doc Pearson and his wife, followed closely by the blacksmith and his family. Within 30 minutes, the Golden Nugget was filling steadily, the atmosphere buzzing with excitement and curiosity. By 7, the saloon was packed to capacity. The musicians played spirited reels and waltzes, couples whirled on the makeshift dance floor, and the savory aroma of Mrs. Hargrove's stew mingled with the sweeter scent of apple pies. Zoe moved through the crowd, greeting guests, ensuring drinks were replenished, and basking in the success of her vision. Jackson remained close by, his presence a steady anchor amid the whirlwind of activity. He seemed to sense when she needed assistance, materializing at her side to help serve a crowded table or settle a minor disagreement before it could escalate. As the evening progressed, Zoe became aware of meaningful glances exchanged between them, fleeting touches that lingered a moment too long to be merely friendly. Each time their eyes met across the room, that now familiar warmth bloomed in her chest, spreading through her like wildfire. During a particularly lively tune, Jackson appeared at her elbow as she replenished the pie table. "Dance with me," he asked, offering his hand. She hesitated, glancing around at the crowded saloon. "I should keep serving." "Everything's running smoothly," he assured her. "And the owner deserves to enjoy her own celebration." Unable to resist the invitation in his eyes, Zoe placed her hand in his, allowing him to lead her to the dance floor. They joined the other couples for a spirited reel that had them whirling and laughing, their bodies moving in perfect harmony. When the music shifted to a slower waltz, Jackson drew her closer, one hand resting lightly at her waist, the other still clasping hers. The proper distance between them gradually diminished as they moved together, until Zoe could feel the solid warmth of him against her, his breath stirring the curls at her temple. "I've been wanting to do this since the moment I saw you in that green dress," he confessed quietly, his voice for her ears alone. "Is that so, Deputy Quinn?" she teased, though her heart raced at his words. "It is, Miss O'Connor." His fingers tightened slightly around hers. "Among other things." The heat in his gaze made her breath catch. "Such as?" Before he could answer, the music ended, and a commotion at the door drew their attention. Silas Morgan stood in the entrance, flanked by Frank Doyle and several other ranch hands. The festive atmosphere immediately tensed, conversations faltering as heads turned toward the newcomers. Jackson's arm tightened protectively around Zoe's waist. "Stay here," he murmured, but she shook her head. "This is my establishment. I'll handle it." Drawing herself up to her full height, she crossed the room to greet her unwelcome visitors. "Mr. Morgan, this is a surprise." Silas's eyes narrowed as he took in the crowded saloon. "Quite a gathering you've managed, Miss O'Connor. I'm impressed." His tone suggested anything but admiration. "Thank you. We're celebrating the continued success of the Golden Nugget." She gestured to the bar. "You're welcome to join us if you've come peacefully." A muscle twitched in Silas's jaw. "Peacefully? Why would you think otherwise?" His gaze shifted to Jackson, who had moved to stand just behind Zoe. "Ah, I see your watchdog is on duty as usual." Jackson didn't rise to the bait. "Evening, Silas. Glad you could make it." For a tense moment, Silas seemed to be weighing his options. The saloon had fallen almost silent, everyone watching the confrontation unfold. Finally, to Zoe's surprise, he nodded stiffly. "One drink," he announced, "to see what all the fuss is about." As Silas and his men made their way to the bar, conversations gradually resumed, though with an undercurrent of nervous anticipation. Jackson leaned close to Zoe's ear. "Don't turn your back on him," he warned quietly. "He didn't come here to celebrate your success." "I know." She squeezed his arm reassuringly. "But throwing him out would only escalate things. Better to keep him where we can see him." The next hour passed in uneasy détente. Silas and his men occupied a corner table, drinking steadily but refraining from overt trouble. The celebration continued around them, though somewhat subdued by their presence. Zoe maintained her hostess duties, moving through the crowd with practiced grace while keeping a watchful eye on Silas's table. Jackson circulated as well, his casual demeanor belied by the alertness in his eyes. It was nearly 10 o'clock when the first signs of trouble appeared. Frank Doyle, well into his cups, began loudly questioning the quality of the whiskey. "Watered down," he proclaimed to anyone who would listen. "The lady can't tell good liquor from horse piss." Several nearby patrons shifted uncomfortably. Zoe approached the table, her expression calm despite the insult. "Mr. Doyle, if you're dissatisfied with your drink, I'd be happy to refund your money." "Refund?" Doyle sneered. "That won't make up for serving swill to honest men." "Frank," Silas cautioned, though a malicious gleam in his eye suggested he was enjoying the disruption. "Mind your manners. We're guests here." "Guests who aren't welcome to return if they can't behave civilly," Zoe replied firmly. "I'll thank you to keep a civil tongue in my establishment, Mr. Doyle." Doyle rose unsteadily to his feet. "Or what? You'll have your pet deputy throw us out." He looked around at the crowded saloon. "Folks ought to know what's really going on here. This saloon should have gone to someone who knows the business. Instead, it's being run by a girl who's sleeping with the law to keep her doors open." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd. Jackson pushed forward, his expression thunderous, but Zoe laid a restraining hand on his arm. "That's a lie," she said clearly, her voice carrying through the suddenly silent room. "And beneath even you, Mr. Doyle." "Is it?" Doyle looked around, playing to his audience. "Everyone sees how Deputy Quinn's always hanging around here, taking her side against decent businessmen like Mr. Morgan. What other explanation could there be?" Before Zoe could respond, Mrs. Hargrove's commanding voice cut through the tension. "Perhaps the explanation is that Deputy Quinn recognizes a legitimate business being harassed by men who can't stomach the idea of a woman succeeding where they've failed." All heads turned to the formidable widow, who had risen from her seat at a nearby table. She fixed Doyle with a withering stare that had cowed men twice his size. "Miss O'Connor has shown more business acumen in 3 weeks than you've demonstrated in your entire miserable life, Frank Doyle. And as for her relationship with Deputy Quinn, Mrs. Hargrove's stern expression softened slightly. "If there is one, it's no one's business but theirs, and certainly no reason to question her capabilities as a saloon keeper." A murmur of agreement ran through the crowd. Doyle, finding his audience turning against him, looked to Silas for support. The cattle baron merely shrugged, apparently unwilling to publicly contradict Mrs. Hargrove. Emboldened by the shift in atmosphere, Doc Pearson spoke up from his table. "I've known Zoe O'Connor since she was knee-high to a grasshopper. Watched her help her father run this place for years. If anyone has the right to take over the Golden Nugget, it's her." Others joined in, voicing support for Zoe and the saloon. The musicians, sensing the mood lightening, struck up another tune. Gradually, the celebration resumed its earlier festive tone, leaving Doyle and Silas isolated in their corner. Zoe caught Jackson's eye across the room, a silent message passing between them. He nodded slightly and made his way to Silas's table, leaning down to speak in a voice too low for others to hear. Whatever he said must have been persuasive, for moments later, Silas and his men rose and departed without further incident. As the door closed behind them, Zoe released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Mrs. Hargrove appeared at her side, an unusual smile softening her stern features. "Well handled, my dear," the older woman approved. "Your father would be proud." "Thank you," Zoe replied, deeply moved by the woman's support. "For everything." Mrs. Hargrove patted her arm. "We women must stand together in this world, especially when men like Silas Morgan try to keep us in our supposed place." Her sharp eyes moved to Jackson, who was watching them from across the room. "Though I must say, not all men are cut from the same cloth as Silas." With that cryptic observation, she returned to her table, leaving Zoe to ponder her words as the celebration continued around her. The rest of the evening passed without incident. Guests departed gradually, each thanking Zoe for a memorable night. By midnight, only a handful remained, lingering over final drinks as the musicians packed their instruments. When the last patron had gone and the doors were locked, Zoe surveyed the aftermath with weary satisfaction. The Golden Nugget was in disarray, tables and chairs askew, glasses everywhere, crumbs of Mrs. Hargrove's pies scattered across surfaces, but it had been an undeniable success. "We did it," she said softly as Jackson joined her, his jacket discarded, shirt sleeves rolled up to help with the cleaning. "You did it," he corrected, his eyes warm with admiration. "This was your vision, Zoe, your triumph." She shook her head. "Not mine alone. I couldn't have done it without you, or Mrs. Hargrove, or all the others who stood up for me tonight." "Perhaps not," he acknowledged, "but it was your courage that inspired their support." He stepped closer, reaching out to tuck a stray curl behind her ear. "You're changing Fairplay, Zoe O'Connor. One celebration at a time." The gentle touch of his fingers against her skin sent a shiver down her spine. "What happens now?" she asked, the question encompassing far more than just the future of the saloon. Jackson seemed to understand the deeper meaning. His hand lingered at her cheek, eyes searching hers. "That depends on what you want to happen. And if what I want seems impossible," she whispered, allowing herself to voice the fear that had been growing alongside her feelings for him. "A saloon keeper and a lawman. The town would talk." "Let them," he replied simply. "They'll talk regardless. Might as well give them something worth talking about." Before she could respond, he closed the distance between them, his lips finding hers in a kiss so tender it brought tears to her eyes. Zoe melted against him, her hand sliding up to his shoulders as the kiss deepened. Months of unspoken longing finally finding expression. When they eventually parted, breathless and flushed, Jackson rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since the first day you stood up to Silas Morgan with that rifle in your hands." Zoe laughed softly. "That long, longer if I'm honest with myself." His arms tightened around her. "But that was the moment I knew for certain." "Knew what?" "That you were the bravest, most remarkable woman I'd ever met." His voice grew serious. "And that I was in serious danger of falling in love with you." The words sent a flood of warmth through her. "Danger, Deputy Quinn? Is that how you see it?" "The most beautiful kind," he assured her, stealing another brief kiss. "The kind I have no intention of avoiding." They stood together in the quiet of the empty saloon, the future stretching before them, uncertain perhaps, but suddenly rich with possibility. Whatever challenges Silas Morgan or others might still pose, they would face them together. And in that moment, Zoe knew with absolute certainty that the laughter that had greeted her first days as owner of the Golden Nugget would eventually fade away, replaced by something far more enduring: respect. The celebration marked a turning point for the Golden Nugget. In the days that followed, business steadily increased as word spread of the saloon's transformation. Many who had attended the party returned, bringing friends and family to experience the warm atmosphere and quality service that were quickly becoming Zoe's hallmark. Even more significantly, Silas Morgan seemed to have retreated, at least temporarily. There were no more supply disruptions, no further confrontations. Jackson suspected the cattle baron was biding his time, waiting for a more opportune moment to strike, but for now, the reprieve was welcome. 2 weeks after the celebration, on a crisp December morning, Zoe was preparing for the day's business when an unexpected visitor arrived. Mrs. Hargrove entered the saloon, her usual stern expression in place despite the early hour. "Good morning," Zoe greeted her, surprised. The widow rarely ventured out before noon. "Is everything all right?" "Perfectly," Mrs. Hargrove replied, settling herself at a table with the air of someone about to conduct important business. "I've come to make you a proposition, Miss O'Connor." Intrigued, Zoe joined her, pouring coffee for them both. "I'm listening." The older woman stirred her coffee methodically. "As you may know, I have certain business interests in Fairplay beyond the boarding house." "The Double Circle Ranch," Zoe nodded. "Yes, I'm aware." "What you may not know is that I also hold several mining investments and a significant portion of the bank's outstanding loans." Mrs. Hargrove's expression remained impassive as she delivered this revelation. In short, my dear, I control nearly as much of Fairplay's economy as Silas Morgan, though I prefer to do so quietly." Zoe stared at her, astonished. "I had no idea. Few do. I find it advantageous to let men like Silas believe they hold all the cards." A hint of a smile touched her lips. "It makes their eventual defeat all the more satisfying." "Defeat?" Zoe echoed. Mrs. Hargrove nodded briskly. "I've tolerated Silas Morgan's methods for years because he posed no direct threat to my interests. But his behavior toward you has convinced me it's time to curtail his influence in Fairplay." She reached into her handbag, withdrawing a folded document. "This is a business proposal. I'm offering to purchase a 25% stake in the Golden Nugget, providing capital for improvements and expansion, while leaving you as majority owner and operator." Zoe accepted the document with stunned fingers. "Why would you do this?" "3 reasons." Mrs. Hargrove ticked them off on her gloved fingers. "First, it's a sound investment. You've demonstrated remarkable business acumen these past weeks. Second, it sends a clear message to Silas that you have powerful allies. And third," her expression softened slightly, "I knew your mother, Eliza. We were friends, of a sort, before her passing. She would be proud of the woman you've become, and I believe she would want me to help you succeed." Emotion welled in Zoe's throat at the unexpected mention of her mother. I don't know what to say." "Say nothing until you've reviewed the proposal thoroughly," Mrs. Hargrove advised, rising to her feet. "Consult with Deputy Quinn if you wish. I understand he's become quite invested in your welfare." The slight emphasis made Zoe blush. "Take a few days to consider. This is a significant decision." After Mrs. Hargrove departed, Zoe sat in the empty saloon, the proposal spread before her on the table. The terms were generous, far more so than she would have expected. The capital offered would indeed allow for significant improvements. A new piano, perhaps, or expanding the kitchen to serve proper meals, or even adding rooms for overnight guests. More importantly, Mrs. Hargrove's backing would all but ensure Silas Morgan couldn't force her out of business. It was, in every respect, a perfect solution to her most pressing concerns. And yet, a small voice inside her wondered if accepting meant admitting she couldn't succeed on her own. Her father had built the Golden Nugget from nothing, with no wealthy patron to smooth his path. Shouldn't she do the same? She was still pondering these questions when Jackson arrived that afternoon. One look at her troubled expression was enough to concern him. "What's happened?" he asked immediately, scanning the saloon for signs of trouble. Zoe pushed the proposal toward him. "Mrs. Hargrove wants to invest in the Golden Nugget." He sat beside her, quickly reviewing the document. His eyebrows rose as he took in the details. "This is remarkably generous." "It is," she agreed. "Almost too generous. You're hesitating," he observed, setting the papers down. "Why?" "This would solve many of your problems." Zoe sighed, struggling to articulate her conflicted feelings. "When I took over this place, everyone laughed. They said a woman couldn't run a business, couldn't stand on her own feet. If I accept Mrs. Hargrove's help, am I proving them right?" Understanding dawned in Jackson's eyes. "You think accepting a business partner means you've failed somehow?" "Haven't I? If I can't make the Golden Nugget succeed on my own—" "Zoe," he interrupted gently, taking her hands in his. "No business succeeds entirely on its own. Your father had partners over the years, silent ones perhaps, but partners nonetheless. He took loans from the bank. He accepted help when it made sense for the business." She looked up in surprise. "He did. He never mentioned." "Because to him, it was just good business sense, not a personal failing." Jackson's thumbs traced soothing circles on her palms. "Taking Mrs. Hargrove's investment doesn't mean you can't run this place. It means you're smart enough to recognize a good opportunity when it presents itself. Put that way, the decision seemed clearer. You think I should accept? I think you should consider it carefully, as any shrewd business owner would. His eyes held hers steadily. But know this, whether you accept or decline, it doesn't change the fact that you've already proved them all wrong. The Golden Nugget is thriving under your management, Zoe. That's the truth, partnership or no partnership. His faith in her, unwavering since that first day, warmed her from within. Impulsively, she leaned forward to kiss him, a brief but fervent gesture of gratitude and affection. "What was that for?" he asked, pleasantly surprised. "For always seeing me clearly," she replied simply. "Even when I don't see myself." 2 days later, after careful consideration and several long discussions with Jackson, Zoe invited Mrs. Hargrove to the saloon after closing hours. The two women sat at the best table, a bottle of fine brandy between them. "I've decided to accept your offer," Zoe announced, sliding the signed agreement across the table, "with one condition." Mrs. Hargrove arched an elegant eyebrow. "Oh, I want to learn from you." Zoe leaned forward earnestly. "Not just about running the saloon, but about all of its investments, banking, property. I want to understand how you've built your empire while remaining largely invisible to men like Silas Morgan." A slow smile spread across the widow's usually stern features. "My dear, that may be the wisest condition anyone has ever attached to a business agreement." She raised her glass. "To partnership, then, and to the education of Fairplay's newest businesswoman." They clinked glasses, sealing the arrangement that would transform not only the Golden Nugget, but Zoe's understanding of power and influence in the West. The partnership with Mrs. Hargrove brought immediate benefits. Word spread quickly through Fairplay that Eleanor Hargrove had invested in the Golden Nugget, lending the saloon a legitimacy that even Silas Morgan couldn't easily undermine. Suppliers who had been hesitant to extend credit suddenly became accommodating. Customers who had stayed away out of deference to Silas began to return. More significantly, the capital allowed Zoe to implement improvements she'd only dreamed of before. A new piano arrived from Denver, attracting music lovers and adding a touch of refinement to the establishment. The kitchen was expanded, permitting the serving of simple but hearty meals throughout the day. Fresh paint, new glasses, comfortable chairs, each enhancement drew more patrons and increased profits. Through it all, Mrs. Hargrove proved to be not only a silent partner but a mentor. Once a week, they met privately to discuss business strategies, investment opportunities, and the subtle ways in which influence could be wielded in a frontier town. Zoe absorbed these lessons eagerly, recognizing that knowledge was its own form of power. Jackson watched her transformation with admiration and growing affection. Their relationship had deepened since the night of the celebration, though both were careful to maintain propriety in public. He still visited the saloon daily, but now occasionally escorted her on Sunday walks or to church services, making their courtship increasingly official in the eyes of the town. By mid-December, with Christmas approaching, the Golden Nugget had become unquestionably successful. Even those who had laughed loudest at the idea of a woman running a saloon were forced to admit that Zoe O'Connor had proved them wrong. All, except Silas Morgan. The cattle baron had remained ominously quiet since Mrs. Hargrove's investment became public knowledge. He no longer frequented the saloon or sent his men to cause trouble, but neither had he conceded defeat. Jackson's sources reported that he had been making frequent trips to Denver, meeting with banking officials and lawyers, though for what purpose remained unclear. On a snowy evening a week before Christmas, Zoe was decorating the saloon with evergreen boughs and red ribbons when Jackson burst through the door, his expression grim despite the festive surroundings. "What's wrong?" she asked immediately, setting aside the decorations. "Silas is making his move," he replied, brushing snow from his coat. "He's filed paperwork challenging your father's will." Zoe froze. "On what grounds?" "He's claiming Michael wasn't of sound mind when he left you the saloon, that his illness affected his judgment." Jackson's jaw tightened with anger. "He's produced witnesses who claim your father promised to sell him the Golden Nugget before he died." "That's a lie," Zoe exclaimed. "Father would never—" "I know." Jackson took her hand, steadying her. "But Silas has money and influence with the territorial court. He's pushing for an expedited hearing right after New Year's." Fear curled in Zoe's stomach. Legal challenges required lawyers, evidence, witnesses, all things that cost money and time, even with Mrs. Hargrove's backing. Fighting Silas in court would be a difficult battle. "What do we do?" she asked, struggling to maintain her composure. "We fight," Jackson replied simply. "We gather every scrap of evidence that your father intended the Golden Nugget to be yours. We find witnesses who can testify to his sound mind and his intentions, and we prepare for Silas to fight dirty." The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Mrs. Hargrove arranged for one of Denver's most respected attorneys to represent Zoe. Doc Pearson prepared a detailed medical affidavit attesting to Michael O'Connor's mental clarity until his final days. Jackson interviewed dozens of townspeople who had done business with Michael, building a record of his consistent statements about leaving the saloon to his daughter. Through it all, Zoe maintained the Golden Nugget's operations with determined cheerfulness, refusing to let Fairplay see how deeply Silas's challenge had shaken her. The Christmas season brought good business, with miners and ranchers celebrating the holiday with greater abandon than usual. On Christmas Eve, after the last patron had departed, Zoe closed the saloon early. Jackson had arranged a special dinner for them in her private rooms, upstairs, a rare luxury of time alone together, without the pressures of business or legal troubles. The small apartment was transformed by candlelight and the fragrant pine boughs she'd arranged around the room. A modest feast awaited them: roast chicken, potatoes, fresh bread from the bakery, and a bottle of fine wine Jackson had ordered specially from Denver. As they enjoyed the meal, Zoe found herself studying his face across the table, memorizing the way the candlelight caught in his eyes and softened the angles of his features. Despite the looming court battle, she felt a profound sense of contentment in his presence. "What are you thinking?" he asked, catching her gaze. "That I'm fortunate," she replied honestly. "Whatever happens with Silas and the court, I have something he'll never have." "What's that?" "People who stand beside me because they believe in me, not because I've intimidated or bought them." She reached across the table to take his hand. "I have you." Jackson's expression softened with emotion. "Always," he promised, his thumb caressing her palm. "No matter what the court decides. Even if I lose the Golden Nugget." The question had haunted her for days. "Zoe," he said gently, "the saloon is important and we'll fight with everything we have to keep it, but it's not what matters most." He rose from his chair, coming around to kneel beside her. "What matters is that you've already won the larger battle. You've proved that a woman can run a business successfully. You've earned the respect of this town. No court ruling can take that away from you." Tears pricked her eyes at the sincerity in his voice. "When did you become so wise, Deputy Quinn?" "Around the time I fell in love with the most stubborn, courageous woman west of the Mississippi." The words fell naturally from his lips, though he'd never spoken them aloud before. Zoe's heart seemed to stop, then race ahead. "Love." His eyes never left hers. "Yes, love. I love you, Zoe O'Connor. Have for some time now." A smile tugged at his lips. Figured Christmas Eve was as good a time as any to say it properly. Joy bubbled up within her, pushing aside the worries that had plagued her for weeks. I love you too, Jackson. Even when you're being overprotective and bossy. I'm never bossy, he protested with mock indignation. Always, she insisted, leaning down to silence his objections with a kiss that conveyed everything words couldn't: her love, her gratitude, her absolute trust in the future they might build together, saloon or no saloon. When they finally parted, Jackson reached into his pocket, producing a small package wrapped in silver paper. "Merry Christmas," he said softly. Zoe unwrapped it carefully to reveal a delicate silver locket on a fine chain. When opened, it contained a tiny daguerreotype of her father on one side, the space on the other currently empty. "It's beautiful," she whispered, deeply moved by the thoughtful gift. "How did you get his picture?" Mrs. Hargrove had one from years ago, had it copied by a photographer in Denver. Jackson fastened the locket around her neck, his fingers brushing her skin. "Thought you might want to keep him close, especially now." The simple gesture, so perfectly attuned to her feelings, confirmed what Zoe already knew in her heart. Whatever challenges lay ahead, Jackson Quinn was the partner she wanted by her side in business, in battle, and in life. The hearing was scheduled for January 5, 1877, in the makeshift courthouse that occupied the second floor of Fairplay's town hall. Snow fell heavily that morning, blanketing the town in pristine white that belied the tension building within the community. Zoe dressed with particular care, choosing a somber navy dress that conveyed both respectability and determination. Mrs. Hargrove had advised her to appear confident but not defiant, professional but feminine, a careful balance designed to impress the circuit judge who would decide her fate. Jackson met her at the saloon, offering his arm for the walk to the town hall. "Ready?" he asked simply. "As I'll ever be," she replied, drawing strength from his steady presence. The courtroom was packed when they arrived. It seemed all of Fairplay had turned out to witness the confrontation between Zoe O'Connor and Silas Morgan. The crowd parted respectfully as Zoe made her way to the front, where her attorney, Mr. Hollister, awaited. Silas sat at the opposite table, immaculately dressed in an expensive suit, his silver hair perfectly groomed. He acknowledged Zoe with a curt nod, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. Judge Franklin Weber entered, a portly man with shrewd eyes and a reputation for no-nonsense justice. After the formalities were observed, Silas's attorney presented their case first, painting a picture of Michael O'Connor as a dying man whose faculties had been compromised by illness and pain medication. Mr. O'Connor had repeatedly expressed his intention to sell the Golden Nugget saloon to my client, the attorney claimed. He recognized that his daughter, while a dutiful child, lacked the experience and capability to manage such an establishment. His failure to complete this transaction before his death was solely due to his deteriorating condition, not a change of intention. Several witnesses were called ranch hands who claimed to have overheard Michael discussing the sale. A bank clerk who testified that Michael had inquired about the process of transferring a business deed. Their stories seemed rehearsed, their connections to Silas Morgan obvious to anyone who knew Fairplay's dynamics. When it was Zoe's turn, Mr. Hollister methodically dismantled the opposition's claims. Doc Pearson testified to Michael's clear mind until the end. The bank president contradicted his clerk, stating that Michael had inquired about transferring the business to his daughter, not selling it. Mrs. Hargrove spoke of conversations where Michael had proudly described Zoe's growing role in managing the saloon. Most powerful was the testimony of Michael's attorney, who had traveled from Denver for the hearing. He produced not only the will leaving everything to Zoe, but detailed notes from his conversations with Michael stretching back several years. Mr. O'Connor was explicit in his intentions, the attorney stated firmly. He wanted his daughter to inherit the business he had built. He consistently refused Mr. Morgan's offers to purchase the saloon, describing them as inadequate and insincere. Throughout the proceedings, Zoe maintained her composure, though her hands trembled slightly beneath the table. Jackson sat directly behind her, a reassuring presence at her back. Finally, after hours of testimony, Judge Weber called Zoe to the stand. She rose on unsteady legs, conscious of every eye in the courtroom following her progress. After she was sworn in, the judge regarded her thoughtfully. "Miss O'Connor, much has been said today about your father's intentions and his assessment of your capabilities. I'd like to hear directly from you. Do you believe yourself capable of running the Golden Nugget Saloon?" Zoe took a deep breath, looking not at Silas or the judge but at the townspeople filling the benches. People who had laughed when she'd first claimed the saloon. People who had gradually come to accept and then respect her position. People whose lives intersected with hers daily in the community they shared. "Your Honor," she began, her voice growing stronger with each word, "when my father died, I had a choice. I could sell the saloon to Mr. Morgan, an option that was financially attractive, but would have betrayed my father's legacy. Or I could honor his faith in me by proving myself capable of continuing what he began." She straightened her shoulders. "For the past 2 months, I have run the Golden Nugget successfully. Our business has increased. Our reputation has improved. We've expanded our offerings and enhanced our premises. These are not the actions of someone incapable of managing a business." Judge Weber nodded slowly. "And yet, a saloon is traditionally a man's domain. Didn't your father express concerns about the challenges you would face?" "My father was protective, Your Honor, as most fathers are of their daughters. But he also raised me to believe that capability is not determined by gender." Zoe's gaze swept the courtroom. "The success of the Golden Nugget under my management is testament to that belief. And what of Mr. Morgan's claim that your father intended to sell to him?" Zoe met Silas's eyes directly for the first time. "My father rejected Mr. Morgan's offers repeatedly throughout his life. He believed, as I do, that the Golden Nugget serves as more than just a business in Fairplay. It's a gathering place, a community center of sorts. My father feared that under Mr. Morgan's ownership, it would become merely another asset in his portfolio, rather than the heart of our town." A murmur of agreement rippled through the courtroom. Judge Weber silenced it with a sharp glance, then continued his questioning. "Miss O'Connor, if I rule in your favor today, what assurances can you provide that the Golden Nugget will continue to thrive under your management?" "I can offer 3 assurances, Your Honor. First, the evidence of our success these past months. Second, the partnership I've established with Mrs. Eleanor Hargrove, a respected businesswoman whose judgment is beyond reproach. And third," she paused, gathering courage, "my own determination to honor my father's legacy by making the Golden Nugget the finest establishment in Fairplay." The judge studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Thank you, Miss O'Connor. You may step down." After brief closing arguments from both attorneys, Judge Weber announced he would retire to consider his decision. The courtroom buzzed with speculation as he departed, opinions divided on how he might rule. Jackson squeezed Zoe's hand beneath the table. "You were magnificent," he murmured. "No matter what happens, remember that." Mrs. Hargrove, seated on Zoe's other side, nodded in agreement. "Judge Weber is a fair man. He'll see through Silas's machinations. The wait seemed interminable, though in reality it was less than an hour before the judge returned. As he settled into his chair, the courtroom fell silent. "I have considered the evidence and testimony presented today with great care," Judge Weber began, his voice resonating through the hushed room. "The question before this court is whether Michael O'Connor was of sound mind when he bequeathed the Golden Nugget Saloon to his daughter, and whether that bequest should be upheld against competing claims." He shuffled his papers, adjusting his spectacles. "The evidence clearly shows that Mr. O'Connor maintained his mental faculties until his death, and that he consistently expressed his intention for his daughter to inherit his business. While Mr. Morgan has presented witnesses claiming otherwise, I find their testimony less credible than the documentation and professional witnesses supporting Miss O'Connor's position." Zoe's heart began to race as hope surged within her. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "Miss O'Connor has demonstrated her capability through the successful operation of the saloon these past months. The business appears to be thriving under her management, contradicting claims that she is unfit for such responsibility." He looked directly at Silas Morgan. "Mr. Morgan, while I understand your interest in acquiring the Golden Nugget, this court cannot and will not overturn a valid will based on unsubstantiated claims and the testimony of interested parties." Turning to Zoe, his expression softened slightly. "Miss O'Connor, this court rules in your favor. The Golden Nugget Saloon is rightfully yours, as your father intended. You have my best wishes for its continued success." With a sharp rap of his gavel, Judge Weber ended the proceedings. The courtroom erupted in excited conversation as people rose to leave, many approaching Zoe to offer congratulations. Silas Morgan pushed through the crowd, his face tight with suppressed anger. For a moment, Zoe feared he might make a scene, but he merely fixed her with a cold stare. "This isn't over, Miss O'Connor," he said quietly. "A legal victory isn't the same as winning the war." Before she could respond, Jackson stepped forward, positioning himself beside her. "Actually, Silas, I think it is over. The judge has ruled. The saloon is Zoe's. If you have a problem with that, you're welcome to take it up with me directly." Silas's gaze shifted between them, calculation replacing anger in his eyes. "You know, Quinn, I always took you for a smarter man. Tying yourself to a doomed business and a woman who doesn't know her place, that's a poor investment of your future." "On the contrary," Jackson replied evenly, "I'd say backing Zoe O'Connor is the wisest investment anyone in Fairplay could make." He placed a protective hand at the small of Zoe's back. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a victory to celebrate." As Silas stalked away, defeated but still dangerous, Mrs. Hargrove approached with a rare smile lighting her austere features. "Well done, my dear. The judge's ruling is exactly what we hoped for. Thanks to your support and Mr. Hollister's expertise," Zoe acknowledged gratefully. "Nonsense. It was your testimony that sealed the victory." The older woman's eyes gleamed with satisfaction. "Silas Morgan has finally met his match in Fairplay, and he knows it." That evening, the Golden Nugget hosted an impromptu celebration. News of the court's decision had spread through town rapidly, drawing curious and supportive patrons alike. Zoe moved through the crowded saloon with newfound confidence, accepting congratulations and well wishes with gracious warmth. Jackson watched from his customary place at the bar, pride evident in his expression. When she finally had a moment to join him, he raised his glass in a private toast. "To the undisputed owner of the Golden Nugget," he said softly, "and to new beginnings." Zoe clinked her glass against his. "New beginnings," she echoed, the words carrying a promise that extended far beyond the saloon. Later that night, after the last customer had departed and the doors were locked, they stood together before the roaring fire in the saloon's main room. Outside, snow continued to fall, insulating them in a cocoon of warmth and privacy. "I've been thinking," Jackson said, breaking the comfortable silence between them, "about what Silas said today about investments in the future." Zoe turned to him, curious. "Oh, he wasn't entirely wrong, you know. A wise person does consider the future carefully." Jackson reached for her hand, his expression suddenly serious. "These past months with you have been the happiest of my life, Zoe. Watching you fight for this place, seeing you grow into the businesswoman your father always knew you could be, it's been a privilege." Her heart began to race as she sensed the direction of his words. "Jackson, let me finish," he requested gently. "I know it hasn't been easy. There'll be more challenges ahead, more battles to fight. Silas Morgan won't give up easily, and running a saloon will always have its difficulties." His fingers tightened around hers. "But I don't want you to face those challenges alone, not ever again." With his free hand, he withdrew a small velvet box from his pocket. "Zoe O'Connor, I love you more than I thought possible. Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Joy welled up within her, so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, Jackson. Nothing would make me happier." He opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small but perfect diamond. As he slipped it onto her finger, Zoe marveled at how perfectly it seemed to belong there, a tangible symbol of the partnership they had forged through adversity and triumph. "It was my mother's," he explained softly. "She made me promise I'd only give it to someone truly special." Zoe touched the ring reverently, deeply moved by the significance of the gift. "I'll treasure it always," she promised, her voice thick with emotion. Jackson drew her into his arms, sealing their engagement with a kiss that held all the promise of their shared future, a future that had seemed impossible just months earlier, when she'd stood alone behind the bar of the Golden Nugget, facing the laughter and doubt of the entire town. As the snow fell silently outside and the fire crackled beside them, Zoe reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the day she'd first claimed the saloon as her own, through the struggles and triumphs that followed, one constant had remained: Jackson Quinn, standing steadfastly by her side, believing in her when no one else would. "What are you thinking?" he murmured against her hair, sensing her contemplation. "That sometimes," she replied, smiling up at him, "it only takes one person believing in you to change everything." He kissed her forehead tenderly. "They won't laugh anymore, you know, not after today's victory." "I don't care if they do," she said truthfully. "Their laughter doesn't define me. What matters is that I proved them wrong, we proved them wrong." "We did at that," he agreed, holding her close against the winter night. In the months and years that followed, the Golden Nugget flourished under Zoe's management. With Mrs. Hargrove's backing and Jackson's support, she expanded the business to include overnight accommodations for travelers, earning a reputation as the finest establishment between Denver and Leadville. Silas Morgan eventually left Fairplay, his influence diminished by his failed attempt to seize the saloon. Without his shadow looming over the town, other businesses began to thrive, creating a more balanced community economy. Zoe and Jackson were married the following spring in a ceremony that united not just two people but two pillars of the community: the respected deputy and the determined businesswoman who had defied convention to create her own legacy. Their partnership extended beyond marriage. Jackson continued his duties as deputy, while taking an active interest in the Golden Nugget's operations. Together, they created a gathering place that became the true heart of Fairplay, hosting everything from town meetings to celebrations of births, marriages, and lives well lived. 2 years after their wedding, their family expanded with the birth of their son, Michael, named for the man whose belief in his daughter had started it all. A daughter, Eleanor, followed 2 years later, her name honoring the woman who had stood by Zoe when few others would. On the 5th anniversary of her father's death, Zoe stood behind the bar of the Golden Nugget, surveying the thriving business with quiet satisfaction. The laughter that filled the room now was warm and welcoming, the sound of a community gathering place doing exactly what her father had always intended it to do. Jackson joined her, their children playing nearby under Mrs. Hargrove's watchful eye. "Happy?" he asked, though he already knew the answer. "Completely," she confirmed, leaning into his embrace. "You know, sometimes I think about that first day, how they all laughed when I said I was going to run this place." He chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her. "And now half the businessmen in town come to you for advice. Funny how things change." "Not everything," she corrected, turning to face him. "You believed in me from the beginning. That never changed." "Easiest thing I ever did," he assured her, brushing a tender kiss across her lips. Believing in Zoe O'Connor has always been the surest bet in Fairplay. As evening settled over the town, and the saloon filled with the familiar sounds of community and connection, Zoe reflected that perhaps this had been her father's greatest gift, not just the Golden Nugget itself, but the opportunity to discover her own strength, to find a partner who valued that strength, and to build a legacy that would endure long after the laughter had faded into distant memory. In the end, it had taken just one person standing beside her to change everything, one cowboy who saw not a woman trying to do a man's job, but a capable, determined individual with the courage to defy expectations and the wisdom to accept help when it was offered in good faith. And in that steadfast belief, she had found not just success, but love, family, and a place in the world that was uniquely, irrevocably her own.